Hey, what's going on, guys? It's etaprime back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at one of the most interesting single board computers of 2021. Now this will be releasing to the public later this year, so definitely keep an eye out. And they will be offering several different models, but we all know the Raspberry Pi 4. As you can see here, I got a Pi 4. This is the 4GB model. It's a decently small single board computer. Next up, we have the Raspberry Pi Zero W, which is an ultra small single board computer, but right now in 2021, this is only offered with 512 megabytes of RAM and a single core ARM11 CPU. I'm a huge fan of the Raspberry Pi Zero given its form factor, but it is lacking in the power department, so that's where this new single board computer comes into play. This is the Radxa Zero, and as you can see, it has the same form factor of the Raspberry Pi Zero, but it has a lot more power, plus built-in eMMc storage, Bluetooth 5.0, AC Wi-Fi, USB Type-C, and a micro SD card slot. Now, before we get started here, I do want to mention that this is not released to the public yet, but it will be available later on in 2021, and they will be offering several different RAM and storage variants of this little single board computer. So far, I've been having a blast with this little board, but since it's really early, I've only been running Android 9 on it, and that's exactly what we're going to be taking a look at in this video. But when it comes down to this form factor, this board is actually pretty powerful for its size. Now there are a couple drawbacks. The only way to get display out of this is over micro HDMI. It doesn't do display over USB Type-C, and there's no DSI connector. But when it comes to the specs, this is powered by a quad-core Cortex-A53 CPU running at 1.8 GHz. This just happens to be the Amlogic S905Y2. For the GPU, we have that Mali G31 MP2. LPDDR4 RAM, and you can get it in 512 megabytes all the way up to 4 gigs. I have the 4 gig model here. Built-in eMMc 5.1 storage, 8, 16, 32, 64, or 128, plus we have a micro SD card slot. Micro HDMI, and it's HDMI 2.1. This will do 4K 60 out. Wi-Fi 5, Bluetooth 5, a single USB 2.0 Type-C OTG connector, and a single USB 3.0 Type-C host. Plus, we have those 40 GPIO pins, and when it comes to software, this will support Ubuntu and Android. Right now, I have Android 9 installed on the built-in eMMc. By the way, this is a 32 gigabyte model with 4 gigs of RAM, but there's already a Batocera image that's up and running on this because we're using that Amlogic CPU, and the guys from Twister OS have a lot of stuff in the works for this, so definitely keep an eye out. I'll leave a link to their channel in the description. Alright, so let's go ahead and get this booted up for the first time. Now for my mouse adapter, I'm just using the simple USB Type-C to full-size USB adapter, but you can use a little dongle like this. This actually has several USB ports on it, but it does make the board a bit bigger. Remember, this does have Bluetooth built in, so you can use a Bluetooth mouse and keyboard, or a keyboard with a trackpad built in. It would make it much easier. And as for power, I'm just using a phone charger, 2 amps, 5 volts, and it does supply sufficient power to this board. The operating system I'm using right now is running from the eMMc module. It's an early build of Android 9 for this little board. And we don't have Google Play just yet, but since we're running an older version of Android, it should be really easy. For this video, I just installed Aptoide so I can get some applications up and running. But I do plan on getting Google Play installed on this. I was just going to wait a little while until they got another build out, but this has been really stable and really fast for being such a small single board computer. Now in this video, we're going to test out a little bit of YouTube video playback, and since we don't have Google Play, I'll use Advanced YouTube. But from Aptoide, I was able to sideload some native Android games and some emulators, so we will test those in this video. And by the way, I don't have a heatsink on this, but for all of my testing, I will be using a small heatsink and a fan. I just want to make sure that I can get the maximum performance out of this. I didn't want it thermal throttling, and down the road, I'm sure somebody will come up with a nice little case for this thing. Alright, so here's a closer look. I'm using an Air mouse over USB just to make it a little easier to navigate through this, but as you can see here, I've installed some applications. I did use Aptoide. Unfortunately, right now with this early build, we just don't have access to Google Play, but overall, this has been a pretty smooth experience. As you can see, we're running Android 9. When it comes to the display, we have that Mali G31 MP2, and for that CPU, we have that S905Y2. So we have a Cortex-A53 quad-core CPU at 1.8 GHz. In order to test out some video streaming, I did have to install YouTube Advanced, but this does give us access to YouTube. It's actually really easy to install. We'll just go for a 4K demo here. And when it comes to 4K video playback, at least right now, I do notice some drop frames. You'll see it skip in just a second, but overall for this thing, even to start up 4K like it is right now, is still pretty awesome. I mean, compared to other boards in this form factor. I've tested Android boxes with the same SoC, and some of them, perform worse, some of them did perform a little better here, but with some optimizations to this Android build, I think we can get some pretty good 4K streaming out of this thing. Now it's time to test out some native Android gaming, and I've chose games that don't require Google Play services, that way I can use them on this thing. As soon as I get Google Play installed on this, I will make another video and we'll test out some higher end stuff, but we're going to start out light here with Real Racing 3. And just as I thought, we can handle this game no problem, but this is a very well optimized game. It's been on the market for a long time, and in the past when testing this on S905 devices, I've always had good luck. Moving over to Minecraft, and by the way, with these games, I'm using an Xbox One controller connected over Bluetooth. Fancy graphics is off with this one, and I'm at 8 chunks. At 12 or 14, it was a bit more jittery than it is here. We could go down to 6, but I left it at 8, and it's not bad at all. And finally, for native Android gaming, Dead Cells. This is a great port for Android. When this first released, it was really hard to run on lower end devices, but the developers have done some optimizations, and I've had good luck on chips like this, so the S905Y2 can definitely handle this game. Now it's time to take a look at some emulation. First up, we have PSP using the standalone version of PPSSPP, Vulkan backend, 2x resolution. This is an easier one to run. We have Tekken Dark Resurrection. This is not going to run something like God of War, at least at the time of making this video. Even if I was to take Chains of Olympus down to 1x with all the hacks on it, would still struggle, but it does do a lot of games at 2x with that Vulkan backend, including Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep, which was really surprising to see. I know this only runs at 30, but it's running at full speed. This little board is handling PSP really well. And going into this emulator, I knew I was going to have trouble with the harder to run stuff, Midnight Club, Dub Edition, Killzone, Chains of Olympus, Ghost of Sparta, but when it comes to some of the mid-range and easier to emulate games, you're not going to have any trouble, even upscaled to 2x. I wanted to throw some N64 in here, so here we have Diddy Kong Racing running with Mupen64 AE, and it's not bad. This is really good, but I'm sure if we moved up to the harder to run stuff like 007, it would struggle a little bit. And finally, we have a little bit of Dreamcast. Now with this one here, I'm using the Flycast core inside of RetroArch. I've never had really good luck with Redream on the S905 platform, but I will test it later on down the road. This was just really easy to access from Aptoid. All I had to do was download RetroArch and get this core installed. We're at around 57 to 58 FPS, and if the counter wasn't on screen, I'd never even notice it. So far, I've been really impressed with the Radxa Zero. It's far from a powerhouse, but given its form factor, I think it's putting out plenty. I've been experimenting with different adapters, USB Type-C to full size to USB, battery packs. I've been experimenting with touchscreens. There's a lot that I want to do with this little board. Right now, I'm just using a little air mouse that's connected over that USB connection, but I did go ahead and order a keyboard/trackpad that's Bluetooth, so I don't even have to have anything plugged in except for power and HDMI to this little thing. That AC Wi-Fi is definitely fast enough for a little board like this. It's only Wi-Fi 5, but it'll definitely get you by. And we also have Bluetooth 5.0 built in, so you can connect all of your favorite controllers over Bluetooth, no issue at all. I did want to run some benchmarks on this thing, but I had some issues getting Geekbench 5 installed without Google Play services. Basically, I really couldn't even find an APK that I could install. And 2.2 crashed on me, and the only one I could really run here was 3D Mark Slingshot. And we got a 328, which is very low when you compare it to new Android phones, but given that this is a super small form factor single board computer and we saw the real world performance that this thing's putting out, I think it definitely has some potential. One thing I've been hearing a lot about this thing is making a handheld out of it, and there's a lot of people out there that are kind of like, no, it's not going to be good for a handheld because it doesn't have a DSI connector. The only way to get display out of this is over HDMI, And while I agreed to an extent because with DSi we could use ribbon cables and make everything a lot thinner, I still think we could make a pretty decent little handheld out of this thing just using that HDMI connector, because there's a lot of screens on the market right now, specifically Amazon, that use HDMI. They were designed for the Raspberry Pi 4 and the Raspberry Pi 3, and a lot of them nowadays are coming with those micro HDMI ribbon cables, and I think we could get this into a small form factor. Plus, we already have Batocera available for this board because it's an S905 CPU, so we have the perfect operating system ready to go. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. Really appreciate you watching. I will be making more videos on the Radxa Zero, so definitely keep an eye on the channel. I'm really excited about this little board to see really what we could do. I will do some power consumption tests and things like that as soon as they get the software worked out. I'll make a video on Linux, and if you want to see Batocera running on it right now, just let me know in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning more about this little board, I will leave a few links in the description. But that's it for this one, and like always, thanks for watching.